Hello everyone and welcome to this almost lunchtime panel discussion on net zero, decarbonisation, the challenges, the opportunities and the action that we're going to take. I hope you've all had a lovely morning. There's been some really interesting talks so far. I know I've enjoyed Michael Marmot out there, which was absolutely fascinating. And hopefully we'll touch on some of those themes in this discussion as well, because I think everything is interlinked. It's all one system. My name is Leah Stewart. I'm a director at Civic, and I'm joined on our panel today by Lame Verev, who is a sustainability director for Net Zero at the Crown Estate. We have Amandeep Singh Kalra, who's the CEO and founder at Greenflip. It's really tiny writing. And my glasses don't work. And we've got Jamie Wheeler as well, who's the project manager at Quintain. So really warm welcome to you all today, and welcome to our audience as well. What we're going to do today is each of our speakers is going to talk for about 5 minutes, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion, and then we'll open the floor out for questions. So keep your questions, start jotting down your thoughts, and you'll get a chance to ask questions of our panel here. So we've got about 40 minutes or so, I think, in total. And I'm going to come to Amandeep first, if that's all right. And then we'll go Lame, and then we'll go Jamie. I'll let you introduce yourselves a little bit more thoroughly about what you do as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Leah. Good afternoon, almost. Yeah, good afternoon, guys. I'm Amandeep. I want to just colour a little. I want to colour retrofitting from a individual health and well-being point of view before I zoom out, because I think it's just really important to ground it. So I grew up in a council estate in southwest London, in a home that was unfortunately cold, damp, mouldy, and the landlord really struggled to really improve on it. It was here actually my mum contracted asthma for like over a decade, and as soon as we managed to move out of that place, probably within weeks, her asthma cleared up. And I don't think when I was young and kind of really connected those two things, but it really stuck home with me, the immediate impact homes, housing, good quality has on people's lives. So then since trained as an architect and spent several years working for the public sector, I was an associate director at Be First, which is Barking and Dagenham's regeneration company. And the job there really was to work in an incredible team to deliver affordable housing, improve neighborhoods, primarily new build, and at pace, really, and sometimes faster than the politics could keep up, unfortunately. And while I was there, I was looking at what it would take to decarbonise the Becontree estate, which is a 30,000, just under, home estate. 4 square miles, biggest housing estate in the UK, and it had 40% of Barking and Dagenham's residents in it. It was in this moment I really saw up close the vast challenge of retrofitting and how little funding there is available, both public and private, to do this properly. I also realized how poorly the homes are in the private rental sector compared to any other tenure. They are the worst, and that there are twice as many fuel-poor residents living in the private rental sector than in the social sector, which absolutely surprised me when I was looking at those. And through all that work, it kept coming back to me that it felt like a ticking time bomb, that this challenge of what do we do with this existing stock? Every year we say there's 80% of the stock will be here in 2050. I'm hearing now 85%. Like every year that's going to get to 90, 95. So, and in the UK, we have about 25 years to retrofit 1 million homes a year. And to put that into perspective, it's like decarbonising every homes in combined boroughs of Croydon, Barnet, Bromley, Lambeth, Wandsworth, Ealing and Westminster. The combined homes of those every year across the UK. So it's quite a big number. And lots of panels that I was attending over the last year, a lot of the same stories about it's a really fragmented process, complicated, difficult, and no one quite knows how to fund this at scale. And I also spoke to quite a lot of institutional investors who were all really keen to invest in both affordable housing and retrofitting. But retrofitting didn't really fit their box in terms of risk scale and the way deals are structured. So it really got me thinking. And either in a moment of optimism or just sheer madness, I thought maybe this is a problem I can have a go at solving. So that's when I left my job and founded a tech startup called Greenflip. Because when you can't find the solution yourself, you have to try and build it yourself, maybe. In fact, it was this time last year, I was having lunch with Yemi Aladrin, who's speaking at loads of events, as she always is. And I was telling her I had this itch, and I thought I needed to scratch it. And here we are, a year later, on this stage again, and I'm talking about having done it. So it's quite a cyclical thing. So Greenflip is about using AI and predictive modeling to spot clusters of homes with the highest retrofit potential. We do this by running like instant heat loss energy generation and investment analysis across thousands of homes at once. And then we're about connecting those homes to investors who want to create portfolios of de-risked, upgraded, future-fit homes for the rental sector and package them to be scaled for institutional capital investment. So we're already working with some early partners to test and refine our digital platform. We started mapping hundreds of properties already to understand which homes are specifically best suited for zero-bill retrofits. It's early in our journey. We're particularly interested in that Octopus Energy zero-bill energy model because there's quite a lot of interest there when you can really, you're really moving away from this green premium to actually a zero-bill premium, which is, I think, quite important to scale this. And for housing associations and councils, the real challenge is figuring out where to spend, what to do, what not to do, and crucially, why we're actually retrofitting in the first place. So we're also here to help analyze their portfolios, prioritizing spending, and whether that's for returns, tackling fuel poverty, or maximizing carbon impact reduction. So more and more housing associations, investors, and councils are recognizing decarbonizing homes isn't just a compliance headache, it's actually a chance to create better places with long-term value. So I'm just really looking forward to speaking with everybody else on the panel here and you guys to ask interesting questions about how we make all of this real and get away from reports and rooms where we talk about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. A brilliant introduction. I'm going to hand over to Lame now to talk a little bit about her work and her experiences in this sphere.
Thanks, Leah. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Lame Vere, Director for Net Zero at the Crown Estates. For those who don't know who the Crown Estates is, we're a land we manage land across rural England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. We also have about £20 billion worth of real estate, and we're also custodians of the seabed up to 12 nautical miles. So we roll out, release the seabed for offshore wind, mineral aggregates, which is about 20-25% of the UK construction industry. If you're interested in finding out more, our annual report was released yesterday, so please pick up a copy online and find out more about us. But digressing from, you know, kind of the PRO pieces of work, basically we are here to support the nation to get to net zero and contribute to the nation's energy secure future. So we work across 4 strategic pillars, and it's important that I say this because then you can see how it all fits together. Is we've got a strategic pillar around net zero, nature recovery, social value, and of course returning financial returns to Treasury. So Treasury is the ultimate boss. In terms of what we're doing, or in terms of my background, maybe I start there. So I'm an economist by background, and I've grown up in energy. And before coming to the Crown, I was the head of innovation and sustainability for the retail arm of SSE. And in there, retrofit was a big part of my day job, and the complexity of getting retrofit to residential homes was a really big pain point. But from a customer lens, when I was doing that job, the biggest challenge was actually the industry ourselves, because we were not relatable to Jane and Joe public, right? So when you go and start talking to somebody about you need to get your house to net zero, you need to decarbonize, you need to do this, and it's kind of like, I don't know what to do. If I walk into a car shop, I just buy a car. Now you want to give me a steering wheel over there, a bonnet over there, and then maybe someday someone will bring me the engine and it all works. So we have to simplify access. So one of the things we did in that role was to create what we call a one-stop shop, where people can come in, have a conversation, tell us what they need, and then we go away and line up the value chain that they need to get to the ambition that they are seeking. because unless we simplify it, retrofitting is really, really difficult, especially in the residential home, as my colleague has just explained. But coming back to the Crown Estates, for those of you who know Regent Street, I'm going to use that as the case point of what we're doing. So most of that is heritage. So heritage retrofitting is even more complex than residential due to the grade listing of the buildings. But we've got a few use cases that you can have a look at if you're out and about in Piccadilly Circus. So New Zealand House is one that we are retrofitting. It's a heritage building. It's grade 2 listed with a grade 1 arcade. And the idea there is to bring a place-making perspective to that regeneration, because it's heritage, it's a retrofit, it's been there for a long time, and so we want to give it a new lease of life, but with a view to make it more accessible to the public realm as well. Then we've also got Spring Garden, which is not a net zero build, but it's a low carbon development. And with that as well, we're bringing a lot of nature and biodiversity to the space. And then the third one is still work in progress, because we've got to do that with Westminster County Council, is bringing the park to park, so connecting Regent Street from the north down to St. James's. And how do you bring nature to an overly built city like London, which is really complex? And there are examples across the world. You know, Singapore is bringing a lot of vertical gardens to their city. Spain has got the canopies for cooling. And I was just talking to Leah. If we think our fuel poorness is from heating during the winter months, as you've seen the last few days, it's going to be really, really hot as the world gets hotter. So we need to be able to provide cooling, whether that's air conditioning or fan or shutters, right? So there are things that we need to start thinking about now from a resilience and adaptation perspective. And simple things that we can start to do as individuals is, you know, in continental Europe, as a standard, they have shutters outside the houses. So you just have to close that during the day to keep the heat out, because at night, if you're not sleeping well, it means that your productivity is declining. You're not functioning at your peak. So the health and well-being benefit is also quite significant for each and every one of us. So it's not just an investment conversation that we're having here today. It's really about lives and livelihoods, and it's about each and every one of us here. The last part of what I wanted to share in terms of what we're doing is also around embodied carbon and how we are reusing some of our stock, given that every development has an inherent carbon in the materials, in the transportation of the materials, in the people doing the work. So within the supply chain, what we've also done is to give embodied carbon targets to make sure that they are using the lowest carbon materials. They are being innovative in material development and facade and those kind of things. And then each of the supply chain has an allocation depending on their contribution to the project. And it's a carrot and stick. So for every carbon saved, they get a bit of a bonus. And for every carbon exceeded, they pay like a little fine. But it's really to create that gamification within the project. And so each of the suppliers are kind of doing a leaderboard and trying to push the agenda really far. So it's about bringing people on the journey, and I would just end when it comes to retrofitting, especially for the residential, because I believe all of us here are living in a residential home, is the conversation is not about just net zero and decarbonization. It's about warmer homes. It's about a hot shower. It's about a cold drink. It's about cooling. It's about health and well-being, right? So we have to really reframe the conversation from a policy making so that we can bring the civil society along with us on this journey. Because unless we do that, we can get to net zero in the UK, but doesn't help the climate, because the world is still 8.2 billion people. So us getting to net zero as an island is not enough. Is what we do as part of that leadership across the globe would also make a lot of impacts for us all. So I'll pause there for now and pass it back to Leah.
There's a lot in there, and we'll get into discussions in a bit. I'm going to come to Jamie next, though.
Thanks, Leah, and thanks Festival of Place for having me here today. So my name's Jamie Wheeler. I'm a project director at Quintain, and Quintain are the master plan developers for Wembley Park. So we own the 85 acres that are around the stadium. And over the last 20 years, we've delivered nearly 6,000 homes, retail spaces, commercial spaces such as this, and new public realm. But today, and thanks Lame for the introduction, because I want to talk about embodied carbon and our experience of embodied carbon and one of our most recent projects. And there's two reasons really that I want to talk about embodied carbon, specifically the A1 to A5 upfront carbon. The first is that, like most organisations, we have a net zero target, but it can feel very distant and it can feel quite hard to grasp for individuals, I think. So on our project, we tried to break that back to what can we do as a project, what can individuals do, what can the supply chain do, individual suppliers, designers, and we actually had real success by doing that and giving people a bit of ownership. The second is that there's a target to build 1.5 million homes, which I think everybody's heard about, and we're 4 years left of that target. So there's a real opportunity, really, to change the way that we undertake our construction processes and have a real tangible impact over the next sort of how many years. Right, so like I say, these projects that I'm talking about are solar and lunar. They're located just the other side of Olympic Way, and they account for nearly 800 of that 6,000 homes target. Now, they've opened this year, and there's people living in them, which is great, but we actually started the design process during 2020. And when we started that design process, we had no real tangible data to go on for our embodied carbon energy targets. We hadn't done it before. These were the first projects where we'd actually set targets and set out to monitor them. So the first thing we did was undertake retrospective assessments of our existing buildings, and that gave us kind of a minimum requirement to achieve. Once we had that minimum requirement, we knew that we needed to better that, but we didn't really know, A, by how much, and B, by at what cost to the project. Because it's one thing to set out to achieve a target, but there was no additional money, there was no additional programme time. So really the challenge to us as a project team was, just by increased scrutiny and focus on the project, what could we actually achieve? And so like Lame said, we wanted to bring the design team with us. We decided to set a sliding scale of targets. We had a should, which was 20% reduction, and we had a could, which was 40% reduction. And we briefed those to the design team immediately. And by setting the targets early, we sort of formalised the requirement for them to report it to us, but the sliding scale gave them a bit of leeway as well, so they weren't intimidated. And I think it was really important to set those targets early, because rather than get sort of fast-track answers like increase your GGBS content, use a different material that isn't suitable for high-rise construction, it actually gave them time to sit back and consider their designs and how they can help our target. So rather than increase GGBS content, for example, we refined the structural grid. We lowered the amount of concrete that we're using rather than the mix, and that had a much greater impact on our embodied carbon. We managed to talk to supply chains. We managed to ask if there's locally sourced products, if there's less carbon-intensive alternatives, and if they'd actually be willing to look at sort of changing their manufacturer processes to assist our targets. And so supply chain was one thing, and our contractors were another. The contractor was really, really worried about these targets. They'd never, ever had to report on them before on a project, and they were worried about punitive measures basically being imposed by us on them that they had no experience, no knowledge, or no understanding of. We wanted to reinforce that collaborative approach. So what we did is we just put those sliding scales in the build contract. No, if they didn't hit them, they didn't hit them. And it was quite a risk for us, but what it did is it took the risk away from the contractor of having to meet those targets, but it put all the responsibility on them. And it gave them the opportunity to report to us monthly at a project level and quarterly at a board level. And what we saw immediately is that the contractors completely owned that, gave the supply chain a chance as well to really shout about their celebrations and successes. So yeah, to cut a long story short, we hit our could target of a 40% reduction. And there's a couple of reasons for that, really. I suppose the first being that we weren't the only clients asking these questions. As you can see from Lame, the industry was changing. These were becoming more commonplace on projects, so supply chains were changing. But I think the second was we really gave ownership to our team to actually like our concrete supplier. So overall, we managed to achieve a total carbon output of 480 kilograms of CO2 per metre squared, which, when you take it to our projects, it equates to a saving of 26,000 tonnes of carbon, just on 2 projects, 800 homes. And we did that at no project cost or time implication. So yeah, for us, it was a real success.
That's a really fantastic example, and I think this idea of driving innovation at no extra project cost is something that is very interesting for people to hear. I am based in the north of England, and we have a lot of discussions around viability with developers and property industry professionals, and I know you're developing in London and maybe it's a different market, but this idea of being able to meet some of these targets without impacting the viability, that really is about your intelligent and innovative supply chain. And
yeah, completely. And to be honest, there's the conversations around viability are exactly the same in London as well. It's the biggest challenge to all of our projects. Sustainability measures are one factor, but there's countless others that we won't go into today. And I think probably that's one of the bigger challenges. Something we've done, which came out through this exercise, is we've trialled low carbon concrete technology with our contractor CISC, and the BRE, they received some government funding for that. Now that's a technology that's been out there in the past. It reduces the carbon intensity of concrete by 70%, but it's never been scalable, it's never cost the same, and it's had program implications. But now, thanks to, I guess, targets and investor demands on projects going forwards, there's real incentive to kind of prove that these things can be done at scale. And the question is, can they be done at the same cost and with no program implications? Because they probably need to be if we are going to have any chance to hit those home targets.
And if I come to you, Lame, about sort of driving innovation, are there sort of particular examples that you, it sounds like you have been doing it with the systems you've been putting in place?
So I can share another from an innovation perspective. So I described a lot of our London real estate is Regent Street, is heritage. And so we've been working with startups to look at designing new windows that fit the heritage facade. Because with the planning permission, because you can't do much on the outside, so you've got to do everything on the inside. And so when you take a building from a decarbonization perspective, you've got to first of all start by reducing the waste. And then once you've reduced the waste, then you insulate, then you take out the boiler and put a heat pump, whatever, but you'd have to be right size fit. For the windows, it's a challenge because if you keep the old heritage windows, they're not as efficient, which means you've got to build a new window on the inside, which takes away your floor space. And that reduces your economics when it comes to rental. So with working with this innovation hub, we found this startup that is able to design like-for-like heritage-type windows, but with double and triple glazing, so you can just plug and play rather than taking floor space. So coming back to the viability of a project, if you're an asset manager and you're losing square footage on the inside in Regent Street, you know that your revenue is going to go down. So where is that break-even point between net zero and net profit is always the question any CFO is asking. And so these innovations will allow us to keep floor space on the inside, maintain the heritage and the facade on the outside, and still, might not get to zero, but decarbonize the building to provide low carbon spaces. Because the other point is, apart from the national need to get to net zero, customers are actually demanding low carbon spaces because nobody's going to rent future properties that don't have a decarbonization plan or at least a pathway to decarbonize. So whether we like it or not, the market has moved, the wind has changed, the customers want it, they're demanding it, and so if you don't want to have stranded assets, then you have to contribute to both building the supply chain in the UK, because that will provide jobs. You have to contribute to the innovation so that we can innovate around the materials, facade materials, but even ways of working, we can go into modular stuff, right? Where you can just take things and put them in rather than building everything out of concrete. So timber frame, it's a big one that is emerging in the real estate business, but then it has a nature impact. So, there's always that intersection and trade-off, but you need to understand what the appropriate trade-off you need to make is, because unless you do that, there will be unintended consequences because you're driving to net zero at all costs, and then you actually create other problems down the line, which we can't see where we sit today. So having that system thinking, which is why I said it was important to mention those 4 strategic pillars, because we take that lens across everything we do. Is it delivering for net zero? Is it contributing to nature recovery? Is it providing social justice, just transition? And then, of course, we have the ultimate goal, which is to provide revenue back into Treasury to fund social services and NHS. So we've got a really massive remit. So there are things that are in our sphere of control, and there are things that will be in our sphere of influence. And balancing those two things has really enabled us to contribute on the innovation side. So before I hand it back, so the other thing we're working on from an innovation perspective is we've been working with Cambridge Climate Tech, looking at their industrial decarbonization accelerator, where we can find products, not technology, I don't need any more software, no disrespect, I think I need to put something physically in the ground, but because we've got such a large portfolio across buildings, land, and the seabed, we can pilot things. And so that is where we bring a lot of value to innovators and new products that are not able to scale because they are not tested. So we can try a thing. So if you're an innovation person and you're looking at materials, especially in the built environment, let's have a conversation, because we're going to roll out a whole lot of development over the next 10 years. And we have an opportunity to test some of these things in those developments. So,
thank you. I mean, that's an opportunity. We're talking about things at enormous scale, but then you come back down to the individual homeowner and the kind of that market. And we're talking about innovation in things, but also innovation in funding as well, and how that individual homeowner accesses that at this sort of that enormous scale, and then down to individual actual people's lives, isn't it? Is that something you can talk a little bit about?
Yeah, I can. One thing, so when I set about on this, I just wanted to hear what residents and people thought. So really early on, we interviewed about 50 people and surveyed over 150 of them. And it was really to get under the grips of some of the examples Lame was giving about people trying to sell you steering wheels. And, people are selling you individual solutions, but they're not selling you the car. And what I realized, after doing all of those, what was clear was there's a much bigger awareness of the driver need to retrofit, primarily, unfortunately, because of the cost of living crisis. But there's still a huge gap to adoption from a lot of people for a lot of reasons. But the main reason that it boiled down to often was the cost of the thing and the payback whilst people were in their property. So it was like, a lot of people in the UK, they usually tend to not be in their forever home first. And unfortunately, climate seems to have landed in a place where, like decarbonisation, where its value is only seen to be realised in 10, 15 years. And often in terms of, if you're just looking at the payback in bills, it will be that long. So our thinking was actually that there is a mismatch here that I can't immediately address that needs bigger issues, but that payback period, which is 10-ish years, does work for investors, does work for housing associations and councils who are long-term custodians of these places. So let's try and give the impact to the people that need the lower bills, but we give the returns to somebody else who has the patience and is in it for the longer term. So that's kind of where our thinking went to, and that's why I think one of the things is working more with investors and landlords and social housing and housing association is kind of trying to figure out what are their needs. So if it's with a housing association, it's like you have X amount of money and you have X amount of assets and homes. Where are your homes that have the greatest arrears? They're likely to be your areas of fuel poverty. They're probably your worst homes. So instead of equally spreading all your money everywhere to try and take everything up to a C, can we go really far and get to zero energy bills in those areas? Because those residents will be better off out of fuel poverty, and actually you'll get some of your rent arrears back. So there is a little bit of a different mechanism to recoup some of those investments, because that's the challenge with housing associations, is how you, and councils, how do you recoup that? So that's really interesting, thinking more dynamically, because I think that 2030 challenge of EPCC, which is slowly coming onto the private rental sector, is a bit of a cliff right now, because from a policy point of view, nobody knows what after that. We know 2050, zero. 2030, C. And there's a huge gap in between that, and C often doesn't mean you're very close to zero at all. Actually, you can get to C with gas boilers still, with like with a bit of insulation. There's still a lot of carbon to remove to get to, and the problem is housing associations and councils and investors who have these homes, they know they're going to have them for a long, long time. Why are you going in there 3-4 times to nudge it to a C, to nudge it to a B, to nudge it to an A? Just let's go in and figure out how we sort it out once, because you know you're going to have to. So let's not just do the bare minimum to comply and spread yourself. I know that's easier said than done. I'm on the board of 2 housing associations, and money is really finite when you're also thinking about we need to increase supply of housing because there's still millions of people on the housing register, and we have cladding remediation challenges, and we also have to retrofit. So there is a limited amount of money. Hence, where we're coming from is that we need lots of private and institutional capital as part of this strategy. And the way to unlock that, there is a bit of a software thing to do for retrofit still, and there's lots of companies I know that should come and there's lots of companies I know that should come and speak to you because they're all in hardware. But the problems I kept hearing from institutional investors who have 50 million, 100 million that they need to deploy quarterly is, I just want to buy a block where I can chuck 100 million in one go, right? I can't be looking at 200 homes, a little bit there, a little bit there, a little bit there, a little bit there. So there is a bit of a role on how do you aggregate and productize a set of homes with a series of measures that can take it as far as possible, de-risk it and aggregate it so that that level of capital can come into it from a private point of view, and we're not just reliant on grants, which more or less is only covering just over 1% of what we need to decarbonise to 2050. So there's still a £630 billion shortfall till 2050.
Build on that with examples,
build.
because I think
just before you do it, I'm going to open it, when you finish, I'm going to open it out for questions, so get your questions ready.
So I think on the part of investment, so a really good example is Block Power in New York. So they have the same challenge as London, is all high-rise, multi-occupancy. You don't want to deal with 100 people, so you go in and you make the investment on behalf of the building owner. So you do the capex, and then you get the revenues back through the rental. So you don't have to deal with all the multiple occupants. So that's one example. Another example is in Spain. So they also have a lot. Continental Europe is mainly high rises. They don't have individual homes like we do here. And so the conversation was, you don't need to own the panels because the rooftop belongs to all of us. So as a building, can we then jointly put the panels, and then everyone benefits from the lower bills and the green energy? So there are creative ways, I'm just saying, not that software is not good, because if for Ola looks to work in Spain, they have to have a lot of software because the distribution and the time of use and type of use and all of that kind of great stuff does need the software. So
no, I was just going to say, we have a bit of an ownership problem in this country where we like owning stuff.
it's your castle, come on.
So it's remember we had this like solar rental thing like decades ago, right? Where companies chucked in solar, they then became part of your mortgage agreement, and banks stopped hating that, then your property became unmortgageable. So we've got a bit of a bad reputation for this type of stuff, but we need more exciting, innovative solutions that can take away the capex cost for a homeowner so that you can get the benefits without having to, but we just have to like get a bit cozier with not having to own every single aspect if we want to move a few things along.
I think, people don't own music anymore. There's just Spotify, no CDs. We're moving towards that as a society.
Energy as a service.
Energy as a service. Excellent. Do we have any questions from our audience? I think we've got one on the front row here, and then there's one at the back.
Thank you so much for the panel. It's really interesting. I'm Mana Yomi. I'm from Up Projects. I was really interested, Jamie, what you talked about, very practical, but putting sliding scales in contracts and that responsibility on them to report at regular points. We do your own contracts with subcontractors, and how do you communicate and encourage them to take on that work?
Being totally honest, it is a risk. We work with framework contractors and predominantly framework suppliers. But I think, like I said, we started this journey in 2020 where it definitely was a risk because this was new technology. This was a new system of reporting for our supply chain. I think now if people hadn't bought into that on that project, they wouldn't be on the tender list for future projects. And I'm sure you wouldn't want to work with people like that again. This is, when you talk about viability, I think sustainability credentials for a project are at the same table as cost, time and quality now, and I don't think that is going away. I'm not saying they're above, but in certain discussions and certain decisions, design decisions, they're at least level and in some cases above. So I think supply chain that don't want to work in a collaborative approach like that probably aren't going to be on our list and probably aren't going to be on many lists for a long time.
For our project in New Zealand House, because we had the same kind of embodied carbon target, so Multiplex is the main contractor, and so the target was in that contract, and then they just pushed it down through the supply chain to their different suppliers. So depending on what part of the project you were working on, your piece was calculated on a pro rata basis, so not everyone owned 100% of the carbon, but you were then driven to innovate around your own space of work to then be able to deliver the carbon savings. So
I think I was just going to say, when it becomes easier if it's led by people that are driven by that same mission, right? So we were just talking about either tenants really pushing for better lower carbon spaces, residents are starting to push for lower carbon homes, then that means developers like these guys who are at the forefront deploying technologies aren't only doing it for the good of their heart, because let's be honest, that unfortunately, if that was the biggest driver, we'd be net zero already. Have a financial need to go and drive this, and then you work with contractors who buy your mission, who then have to work with a supply chain who buy, because if you don't and you're just trying to use your same subby steel contractor and telling them, can you just use a bit more, it's not going to fly, and you're going to have an uphill battle. Whereas what you want is they just get it. Your main contractor gets it, and then your subcontractors are chosen who get it, and it allows more innovative ones to come in who are struggling to break it, because actually clients like these two have been saying it from the top that that's what we're doing and that's our mission.
Thank you. Have we got any other questions from the audience? We've got one here. Thank you.
Hello, Mark Rowe from Less.eco. We're a spatial sufficiency consultancy. Yeah, a lot of talk on the panel of 2050, but of course the GLA still retains an aspiration for net zero by 2030. Struggling not to make this a pessimistic question, but to turn it around rather than ask on the viability of that target, what one radical policy would each of the panelists like to see in the new London plan that might make hitting net zero in 2030 a reality?
Lame, you look like you're poised to answer that with your one radical policy.
I think they've already done it, right? For all new build now, there is a requirement to have rooftop solar, so you're going to start with a lower carbon building for the new ones. The big challenge is still on the retrofitting, and the problem there is that for as long as we've known the technology of heat pump, why has it not scaled? Because of the stop-start policy. So I think if we're going to make a radical change to get to 2030, whether it's 50% or 60%, doesn't really matter. Let's keep the timeline as it is, but leave the policy in place long enough for the investment to crowd in, long enough for the supply chain to move in, long enough for the skills, because we didn't talk about skills today now, but for the skills to be developed. Because unless people can see a pathway to growth, the 16, 18-year-old is not thinking, I want to become a heat pump engineer, because they can't see it. The last time it came around, then it disappeared for 10 years. They did all that training with no job. So for me, it would be leave the policies in place long enough for the market to thrive.
This isn't probably for the mayor, but this is probably for Keir. But I would love a policy where we can do like a 12-month stamp duty payment delay. So idea being that there's usually 500,000 homes in the UK are on the market at any given time, and more than that exchange hands. But if in that moment, rather than paying then, you delay it by a year and say, if you can get your house to EPCA or net zero, whatever the target we choose, you don't have to pay that. And I think it just becomes a way stronger impetus, especially when homes are changing, people haven't moved in, they want to do a bit of reno, that disruption and stuff just disappears.
We did HMRC would like that. That's revenue loss.
But they did some fun, interesting stuff with this maybe 10, 11 years ago. There was like these low carbon homes and there was stamp duty exemptions for this. I was digging up some fun discount. So they have trialed it. It didn't last for very long, but it was there. So, I mean, I think this would radically make people make serious change, because who wants to give 20, 30,000 pounds to HMRC? No one. So.
Yeah, the targets that we've got there are sort of top down, and I'd probably relate it back to our individual project experience and say that really a lot of the targets can come from top down, but the solutions need to come bottom up from the individual industries that contribute to the construction process. So I think things like low carbon concrete, wider rollout of heat pumps, things like that are probably a huge part, particularly talking from an A1 to A5 perspective. We need to engage with the experts in the individual industries to ask them to help us come up with these solutions to meet targets. Otherwise, like you say, they could be pessimistic come 2030.
Just for the benefit, A1 to A5, when you...
Sorry, A1 to A5 is upfront carbon that's created during the construction process.
Thank you very much. We've actually come to the end of our session. In terms of just summing up, I think, I was listening to Michael Marmot earlier and talking about there are reasons to be pessimistic, but there's also, I think our panel has shown there's a lot of reasons for hope. I think we are seeing intelligent investors who are interested in investing in this space. We can see an intelligent market. There's a demand now for environmentally sustainable homes, for lower bills, for healthy homes, and people are demanding this. We can see that amongst our own customers and amongst our own selves. And I think we're seeing an intelligent industry as well that is evolving to meet this challenge. Obviously, we've got a way to go, but I think there's a lot of ambition and there is a lot of hope. And I'd like to thank our panel today who've had some really fabulous insights on net zero and decarbonisation and the challenges that we've got, and also this idea of opportunities and hope. And I also want to thank all of you for attending. Thank you very much.